Hello and welcome everybody. I hope you can all hear me. Great that you are joining us for this LIBER session on tools for transparency and open access. My name is Simone Kortekaas and I work for the Library of Wageningen University and Research in the Netherlands. And I'm really happy to chair this meeting on this hot Friday afternoon. Before we start, I have some housekeeping rules for you. This session is recorded so that we can share the recordings and the slides afterwards. If you have during the session, during the presentations, any questions or remarks for the speakers, please type them in the chat box on the left. And after the 3 talks, there will be time for a Q&A session to have some discussion amongst us. In this session, Tools for Transparency and Open Access, we will have 3 talks who look at open access from 3 different angles. Sarah Ames from Scotland National Library will talk about presenting library collections as data. Maurits de Graaf will present and discuss the library toolkit for open access publishing. And Nicole Kruger and Tamara Pianos from the Leibniz Information Center for Economics will talk about their academic career kit and the way they share this as open online learning material. All 3 interesting, so stay tuned despite of the heat. And now I'm happy to turn over to Sarah for the first presentation. Please, Sarah, come in. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Simone. Thanks very much for coming along today to the last session on a Friday. I'm Sarah Ames. I'm the Digital Scholarship Librarian at the National Library of Scotland. And today I'm going to talk about digital scholarship at the National Library of Scotland and the work that's been taking place over the last year. I'm going to talk about practical work around collections as data that we've been doing over the last few months, and also how we're trying to embed transparency into this work. So firstly, some background to our digital scholarship service. This has really only been going now since September 2019, so it's new. We're still learning and there's a lot of work still to do, but I wanted to talk a bit about what we've done so far. But first, what is digital scholarship? Well, for us, it's the use of computational methods with National Library of Scotland collections to enable new forms of research. So it's the use of digital tools or techniques or methods to explore or exploit or analyse our collections. In a Venn diagram, it sits between our collections, computational methods, and research activity. So there's digital scholarship bang in the middle there. And our service has got 5 main objectives. The first one is to enable the use of computational research methods with the collections. So essentially this means making collections available in machine-readable format or as data. In doing this, we can fulfill our second objective, which is to ensure that we're using our collections to their full potential. So we want to enable both analog research and also digital research with our collections. The third objective is to establish a culture in the library that understands digital scholarship and can support digital scholarship. And we've been setting up training sessions for staff and talks for staff as well on different topics. The fourth element is to promote transparency in our data creation processes. And this is going to form the topic of this talk today. And then the fifth one, perhaps slightly ambitious, is to anticipate the future of research. And what I mean by this is that we want to make sure that our collections stand the test of time and that they remain relevant and useful and usable even when technologies change or when methodologies change. So the aim of this talk would be largely thinking about number 4, practice and promote transparency in our data creation processes. So this recognises that the library is increasingly becoming a data producer and a producer of its own collections, and that this is problematic. We've got 3 levels of our service. Self-service, where users can essentially come and just make use of our data and our tools. We have self-service with some consultation time, where maybe they talk to me or to a curator or a developer. And then we have a funded service, where we have the resource to collaborate or partner on projects. So a really quick aside here, why are we calling this a service? Digital scholarship isn't a service. The narrative in LIBER has been very much around libraries collaborating with users. The narrative in RL UK, Research Libraries UK, is also the same. They say project to partner to pioneer. Well, we've called this a service for a few different reasons. Firstly, pragmatic reasons. So this was initially a fixed-term post and role. So I don't want the word project or program associated with this. It's too finite, it's too easy to stop. Service is a term that libraries understand as ongoing activity to help communities. However, we do also need some level of service provision to enable collaboration in the first place. So we need to offer collections as data. We need to be able to provide technical and other support. And then lastly, we need to remember that some users don't want to collaborate. They want to make use of our openly licensed data, which they're perfectly within their right to do so, and we actively encourage them to do so. And then they want to go away and work on their own project. So there's a few reasons there, but we do seek collaborative projects as part of a funded service, which gives us the capacity to go in at partner level. Back to the overall narrative. So there are 3 main areas of our work for the Digital Scholarship Service. The first one is making data available. And as I'm sure you can imagine, at a national library, there's loads to play with here. So far, the bulk of our work has been around text and images, and that's because we currently have an in-house mass digitisation programme underway. But as you can imagine, there's also metadata collections we want to make available at scale. We've got the Moving Image Archive for Scotland in Glasgow, so loads of audio-visual collections, extensive map collections, web archive, and also organisational data too. So there's a lot to get your teeth into. Second, our activity is around external engagement, where we collaborate with users. We have a PhD studentship currently being recruited. We have a digital artist in residence doing amazing work, and a digital scholarship fellow who's shortly to be announced. But it also means thinking beyond the research community. So we're a national library. We have a broader responsibility than this, and it means thinking to audiences such as school audiences or creative groups or even businesses. And then there's internal engagement around raising awareness of digital scholarship, setting up skills training opportunities for staff, seeking out champions. And really all of this is feeding into a broader culture change in our library, where we're beginning to think about our collections, our roles, our skills in new ways. So the first 6 months of activity focused on initial setup and workflows, and I'm going to talk briefly about how we're turning our collections into data so that this will set up what I want to talk about with transparency in our practice. So firstly, we had to think about our users. We identified 3 broad users, and this is a little bit crude, but they ranged from beginner to advanced. At one end, they only wanted text files, for example, and at the other, they had all the technical skills and didn't mind what format our digitized material was presented in. And then in the middle, there was this more complex middle ground user who has limited technical skills, but who understands the value of different formats and approaches for research questions. We decided to cater to this middle ground user, as it would enable us to satisfy most of our advanced and our beginner users also. So to ensure that we could provide consistent formats for this user group from our digitisation programme, we needed to change our approach to digitisation. So digital scholarship brings about a new use case for digitisation. Previously, we've been digitising solely with the idea of online image galleries in mind, and there's nothing wrong with that at all. But digital scholarship needs a few additional steps. So on the screen here is a really broad process for how we go from a print collection to a data collection, and all of the things you need to think about in between, such as the granularity of rights assessment, the different file formats you might want to create, the different metadata you want to compile and bring together, how you might structure a data set, where you might store it, what kind of persistent identifier you might give to a data set, and then how you wrap all of this up and publish it online as data. So we've had to make decisions about our standards, about our image sizes and quality, about where we'd store our data. Most of it's in the cloud at the moment. We had to think about what first 5 data sets we'd launch with. And then we wanted to think about what kind of additional information we wanted to gather and make available. So how to be transparent and how to present our data sets in context. Slides taking a while to load. Here we go. In September 2019, we launched our Data Foundry website. I realised I should have put the website address on this. It's data.nls.uk. Do take a look if you have the opportunity or the time to do that. Despite being a fairly small website, the work underlying it has been a library-wide effort. It's been a great effort from across the National Library of Scotland, from developers to curators, even through to our marketing team. So everyone's pulled together as a big team. So amongst all of this work, how are we promoting transparency in our work? And what are the challenges of this? So firstly, why be transparent? What's the value of being transparent? Well, open practices enable us to convey information about library processes, any transformations our collections have undergone or our data has undergone, and the decision-making around this. So just as there's a movement for reproducible research in academia, we need a similar sentiment in libraries. This enables us to acknowledge and to reduce biases, to be open about where our decision-making processes may not be perfect, and where they may have failed us, and where historical decision-making or practices still may have repercussions today. And this empowers us and our users to provide counter-narratives, to explore what's missing or what hasn't been said, what gaps there are, and to start to rectify this. So I wanted to talk a bit about how we're trying to do this. So as you can see, transparency is one of our core principles. So on the homepage of our website, it says that we take the provenance of our data seriously and we're open about how and why it's been produced. Firstly, I must say that this is a work in progress. There's always new information to dig up and to release, and we acknowledge the limitations of our work to date. We're really keen to learn from the work of others too. So one quick win for us has been the use of social media to communicate to a large number of users at the same time. One example of this was our Twitter activity for the Day of Digital Humanities this year, where we chose to highlight invisible labour and digital scholarship. We set up a Twitter thread to explain the processes which I described in the previous section about how we turn our collections into data, to lift the lid on the process and to encourage an understanding of the amount of work and the number of teams involved in this. So all of our digital scholarship tweets are under the hashtag NLSData, so you can take a look for this if you're interested. We were careful to word it for a broad public audience, and we went through the steps, such as curatorial work, rights assessment and conservation, as well as book fetching activity, digitization, ingest and preservation. And of course, these are very light touch in this thread. Then we looked at the labour involved from the metadata team and the developers. We talked about what a data set is, and we highlighted the importance of transparency in these processes. We explained where they're stored, what kind of persistent identifier we give a data set, and then we highlighted some of the uses of our data sets, and I'd really encourage you to take a look at this page, actually, the projects one. People are doing amazing things with library data. It's really wonderful. So this thread received a really positive response, and it helped us to begin to highlight the human effort and therefore the biases being put into our collections. It enabled us to begin a dialogue with our users about this kind of work. And this brings me on to the presentation of data itself. So what do all of these processes mean for the way in which we actually convey our data? Our open data publication plan is published on the Data Foundry so that everybody can see it. It sets out the level of open data that we work to at the moment, what formats we use, how frequently you can expect us to publish data, and where we publish it as well. We also have an open data register of all of the data sets we publish, their dates, their update frequency, and file formats, and so on. And all of this is downloadable from the Data Foundry. So this helps us to be clear about expectation and also what our actions are and what they will be. The data itself is published to the Data Foundry website. Here's an example of Encyclopaedia Britannica. So this is one of our most popular data sets. It's 100 years of Encyclopaedia Britannica, which is the first 8 editions. So the presentation of cultural heritage datasets is, I think, a really valuable thing. So given their size, the concept of a collections dataset can appear to be somewhat opaque and confusing. So issuing a number of key points about each data set, such as the number of files, the number of words and even lines, the level of OCR cleanup, the date range of the data, essentially declaring the corpus, as well as providing a curator-led introduction to the collection, gives some shape to an otherwise abstract concept. All of our digitized collections go through a prior rights assessment process. All data sets on the Data Foundry have clear rights statements, and the library doesn't assert further copyright over the collections. Rights statements or licenses are added to each data set, and some collections like this one, which span lengthy periods of time, cross into a number of rights statements. And then we provide simple downloads, and there's future plans for API access, but the downloads at the moment reduce technical barriers to use, so it encourages a broad user group. Each data set includes an inventory file and a README file, which contains high-level information about the data set, including file numbers and formats, the date of publication, subsequent revisions, and rights information too. Including METs and Alto and image files led to some datasets reaching more than 40 gigabytes in size when uncompressed. So you can see the example on the screen of Encyclopedia Britannica, that all the data download is 44 gigabytes. So storing and making these available in the cloud has ensured faster downloads. And we provide tiered downloads of the data to enable users to download a sample before committing to downloading the full dataset. We also provide text files, for example, for the use case of the beginner user I mentioned earlier, who may only want to use an online tool to explore the text, for example. When the dataset is compiled and zipped and published online, a DOI is then added as a persistent identifier to enable citation. So together, the features and the files of the Data Foundry are designed to ensure minimal effort is needed on the part of the user to gain an overview of the data. So data provenance is something we've been thinking about a lot at the National Library of Scotland. We want to ensure that our readers understand where the data they use has come from, what processes it's undergone, and why it exists in the first place. But how to convey that information in an area that currently has few agreed standards is a challenge. So we include as much provenance information as we can in our METS files. This includes descriptive metadata around bibliographic and holdings information. It includes administrative metadata, including information about image capture, file creation and rights, and also file listings and structural metadata. This kind of information, and particularly the technical provenance information around the digitization process, is essential to be able to reconstruct the actual process from print collection to data collection and back again. But it doesn't include opportunities to explain why an item was digitized in the first place. So why is this important? Well, from an entire pool of a library's collections, which is itself informed by often problematic historic collecting practices, only some items are then digitized, the result of factors including copyright, conservation, and internal selection processes. From this subset of the collection, only some are then presented as datasets. Again, it's dependent on resource or technical factors or OCR quality or copyright. So how to present these collections in context and how these thinned down collections could become representative of a broader tacit understanding of culture is problematic. Given current copyright laws and the standardized format of many 19th century collections, many data collections and research projects have a strong emphasis on this period, with many other audiences also hold a stake in the availability of digital and data collections. What could this mean for creative outputs, or for school learning, or for business analysis? How are these collections representative of the diverse communities that we serve, and how do we explain this problem to our users? So we're working on contextualizing our data collections. We currently include information about the reasoning behind how and why our data sets have been produced alongside our data to ensure a fuller understanding of the collections. So like many libraries, we provide the usual technical provenance information in our metadata files, as I mentioned, but we're now also systematically making available information about why our collections have been digitized, what funded them, whether they were outsourced, and so on, to present as broad an understanding as possible into why the collection came about in its current form. This also helps us to build freedom of information into our data creation processes. So we're currently including this information in a mods other field in our METS files. It's just unstructured text, it's not ideal, but we wanted to keep this information close to the data sets. So finally, to end a short talk on a big question, all of this points towards the broader issue around the new responsibilities of libraries. So traditionally, libraries have been acquirers. We've purchased our collections or they've been donated, and we then describe them according to supposedly objective neutral standards, and of course that's problematic in itself. And we then make them available. But with this shift towards digital, however, we're now becoming producers of our own collections. So at the National Library of Scotland, we have huge amounts of data not only being produced as we OCR our digitised texts, but there's also information coming out of the digitisation process more broadly. So we have data coming off the scanners, we've got data coming off the OCR software, we've got data coming off the digital production tools that we use. We and other libraries produce metadata, and we produce corporate organisational data. So to end on a broad question, what are our responsibilities as data producers? So how do we describe our own data, and how do we convey information about how and why and where it's been produced? How do we accurately contextualize our own processes? And how do we, in doing this, retain our position as a trusted source of information when we're creating that information ourselves? So transparency, of course, I think is essential. And the more that we can set our data collections in context and be clear about the processes and the decision-making that they've undergone, the more value they will have as research material. So thank you very much for listening. I'm really keen to know what work colleagues here are doing around transparency in their collections and in their practice. And I'm really happy to answer any questions too. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah, for this interesting talk on this thorough process at your library. I saw a question coming up, but we'll take that in the question and answer session at the end. And I now hand over to Maurits de Graaf.
Thank you very much, Simone. And thank you for this opportunity to present the tools in the library toolkits to facilitate and to speed up the transition to open access. I would like to start with a graph, and I would like to a graph I made from data from the European Open Science Monitor, and I would like to focus on the arrows. First, the graph represents the percentage of open access articles per publication year, and you see the green arrows for 2016 and 2018. That's are the 2 years I would like to focus on. So that's the green open access, of course, and here you see the arrows for gold open access in open access pure gold journals and in hybrid journals. And here you see the focus on the top line, the blue arrows, the total percentage of open access articles in those 2 years from the perspective of 2019, so to say. What can we learn from this graph? Well, we can easily see that green open access has an important contribution to open access, albeit with a delay of often 1 or 2 years because of this embargo period, which is often necessary. We can also see that the percentage of gold and hybrid open access articles are increasing to about 24% in 2018. And we know, I can explain it later maybe, that for the large part, these articles are paid by APCs, article processing charges. Top line of closed access articles in 2018, 64% closed access. But from the viewpoint of 2018, the 2016 articles, 59% is still closed access. So I would like to focus this presentation on the tools that are available to libraries to help and facilitate, speed up the transition to open access. And first, let's have a look at green. Of course, the tool for green open access is the institutional repository. And here we see a graph of the number of repositories over since 2005. I did myself a study in 2007 for the then project, European project Driver, to identify institutional repositories in Europe. At that time, we identified, I think, 200, 250 approximately. And looked at this graph now, we have more than 5,000 repositories in the world, and the number is still increasing. And that means that there is a clear impact of this green open access, lots of repositories as we have seen, but also a response of the publishers. At that time, in the beginning of the 2000s years, it was not allowed to self-deposit an article version of your article in a repository, but now the large majority of publishers do allow self-archiving. And as we have seen, an interesting percentage of articles are available via green open access. So then let's focus on the library toolkit for APC Gold Open Access. What we have in the toolkit, two tools, APC funds and transformative agreements, relatively recent, those are transformative agreements. But we have to focus a little bit more about those APCs. Who is paying those APCs? Well, most of the time now the authors, but there are two revenue streams, two financial streams that they use for it. Institutional funds, sometimes from the library, sometimes from their own budget, discretionary budgets like a departmental budget. Or the other big financial stream is from the research funder, sometimes directly from the research funder, but sometimes it's from a research grant that is obtained by a researcher. Here you see a slide how it is now in practice. In practice, this is based on a survey among over 1,000 authors last autumn, 2019. How they paid their APCs. Well, a little bit over half of the authors is using one source, one provider of funding to pay this APC, and a little bit under half of the authors is paying is using multiple sources for funding to pay this APC. And if you look at the other to the APC payments, you see that 50% of the APCs are paid by the institution, but the other part is paid by the author, by the research funder, by the co-author. In short, it looks a little bit chaotic right now in the field. So we had the opportunity to interview 16 libraries around the world, I have to say, about their policies with regard to APCs, and I can present a number of results from that survey. We could distinguish 4 models. The basic model is here is model A, that the finance streams are completely separate. So the library pays for subscriptions, and the authors pay APCs, sometimes out of research grants, sometimes out of departmental budgets. And there are no transformative agreements in place. And one respondent said, upon a question of mine, she said, well, the library cannot do it alone. And I think we will find out later why that is. But then we have what I called model B. That is, there is at least another tool. So there is subscription journals of APCs paid by authors, but there's also an APC fund managed by the library for those articles that are not covered by a research grant. And so the library steps in to pay that APC. Then model D, I will explain later model C. Model D, that is those are libraries that have transformative agreements in place. So the transformative agreements, read and publish agreements, and publish agreements for articles that are covered by those agreements. Sometimes there's also an APC fund for other payments of APCs, but still there are often APCs paid by researchers out of their research grants for other journals. So those libraries have in place transformative agreements, they have a library open access fund, and they try to monitor open access articles produced by the authors of their institute, and also they try to track all APCs that are paid by authors of their institute. Well, there's a variation, that's the model C, that's a little bit to keep you awake. That is a variation on model D, mainly in the UK, where the research funder are in the lead to transition to open access, and that's a variation. The big change is that the funds of the library are often provided to pay APCs are often provided by the research funders under the name of block grants. So if you have a closer look at model C and D, then I interviewed a number of front runners, and they told me that they expect to have a read and publish deals with the top 20 publishers of their university, used by their university, and that they expect then, if they have those transformative agreements are in place, that about 70% of the articles produced by their university will be covered and thus published on open access. They're looking for additional mechanisms to look for the other 30%. As you know, there are around 40,000 journal titles on this world, and there are also approximately 10,000 publishers, often very small publishers with 1 or 2 journal titles. And so you cannot have, of course, agreements with the long tail. So you're looking for mechanisms to fund APCs for articles that are published by the long tail, articles written, authored by authors of your institute. And those front runners, they report the need for 2 to 4 additional full-time equivalents, extra staff for additional workflows. So what are those workflows? You see that at the next slide. Well, first of all, you have to check those read and publish deals. You have to check the eligibility of the author. Is this really author? Is this really working for our university? And you want also to monitor the number of articles that are published on open access, because you pay for it. So you want to check that out. Also, institution-wide tracking of APCs, because the idea is that you cover and facilitate open access publishing by all your researchers. So you want to know that you want to get rid actually of those APCs paid in the wild. You have the management of your APC fund. You monitor the open access, the entire research output of your university and the part of the percentage of open access using bibliographic databases. And last but not least, you need services or tools to inform the authors of your university about those transformative agreements, so that if they publish in a journal of one of that's covered by the agreement, they know what they can expect of it. So all this has a number of important implications. One of it is that it's a fundamental change that until now it was two actors, the author and the publisher, and now there's suddenly a third actor in place that needs to be informed of the acceptance and submission process, and that is the library. So that's a new thing, and also important is that the libraries that are on this path, they are for them the journal acquisition budget becomes more and more an article publishing budget. And the Stockholm University Library has stated that explicitly in an article. They say that our aim is a gradual and cost-efficient reallocation of the acquisition budget to pay for publishing rather than subscriptions. So a few observations and conclusions of this library toolkit. First of all, why would a library spend 2 to 4 full-time equivalent on extra tasks to perform? Well, I think the business case is rather clear. The other session, Heather Pivovar, difficult to pronounce, but she gave an excellent presentation in the session this afternoon. And she has done a number of studies with colleagues which show that open access articles get 60% more views than closed access articles and 18% more articles, citations, I beg your pardon. So that gives a university that publish on open access a clear competitive advantage to universities that don't do that. So, and it also, I think, rather important, aligns the library with the goals of a university. And the libraries are often in the doghouse a little bit. So that is, I think, also a very important aspect of this thing. Then a few conclusions. The one is that this model C&D is reality, but at the moment, relatively few research libraries have it. It is important to remember that this APC market is partially funded directly or indirectly by research funders, which means that if you start this to have these read and publish agreements or publish licenses, that means that the financial burden is shifted towards the library, and that the library cannot do it alone. That was the reason behind that remark. You need to share the financial burden with the research funders, and that is relatively easy to do in the European landscape, because the European landscape of research funders is rather, at most it is national, of course, rather limited number of clear landscape with a limited number of research funders, whereas, for instance, United States of America, that is much more fragmented, local, private, state. So that's for them, it's much more difficult to get financial contributions for this kind of deals from research funders. Then another number of conclusions. We had in the discussion in the past, there were quite a number of discussions among proponents of green and proponents of gold, and there was always a big discussion. Well, forget about it. Both contribute to the transition to open access. The LIBER strategic plan has envisaged that the open access will be the predominant way of publishing in 2022. Well, I think we're going to have that, but maybe 1 or 2 years later, and maybe in Europe only. But for this, we need a number of steps still to do. We need lots more of those read and publish agreements. I think we also need, but are already in development, mechanisms for the long tail publishers of APC gold journals and hybrid journals maybe. But we also, and I think that will be the next step, and I was limited to 20 minutes with this presentation, but the next step, I think what we will see is that libraries will more and more focus also on diamond open access. So APC free open access journals with all kinds of mechanisms such as subscribe to open access or library publishing efforts. So I think the next conferences of LIBER will have many presentations about diamond open access and library involvement. So a last few words. Again, this financial participation of research funders is often very much relevant to enable transformative agreements. A fundamental change is that this two-way traffic between the author and the publisher now becomes a sort of three-way traffic. Again, I think in the long run, you will see that the APC market will move from an author market towards an institutional market, so no or less APCs in the world. And last but not least, I think that transformative agreements will transform the scholarly communication landscape, but will also transform the libraries themselves. Journal collections will be transformed. Journal acquisition procedures will be transformed. So if you would like to see more details about the results I presented, there is a white paper, APCs in the Wild, which is shown on this slide. So that's my presentation so far, and thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Maurits. This was a very nice overview of what's happening around open access publishing and where we stand, and also a bit on what we're heading for. Lots of applause I see on the bottom of the screen. We now move to the last two speakers, Tamara Pianos, please, and Nicole Kruger, please enter the stage.
Right there.
Thank you, Simone. And yes, we will talk a little bit about our experiences in creating an open educational resource for early career researchers to improve their skills on sharing and publishing. And we come from the ZepaW, the Leibniz Information Center for Economics, which has two libraries, one in Hamburg and one in Kiel, both in northern Germany, and we're national research infrastructure for economics and business studies information. We had our 100th anniversary last year, so we were lucky we were able to have a big celebration. I know that some people this year were unable to celebrate their 100th anniversary, so I know what they're missing. And we do research in the fields of open science and web science. And we provide the search portal EconBiz, which has a section on research skills with learning materials that can be found there. And a while ago, we created a guided walk for students, which was a bit tongue-in-cheek, not too serious, but to show them a little bit how to search and evaluate, how to access full texts, and how to cite correctly. And we had this out in the open. And then people approached us and said, oh, that's great, we want to use it, but we want to use it in our own context. Can we use it for our own library? And we said, yeah, sure. But there were a couple of problems involved. And we said, okay, let's make it an open educational resource. And at this point, I hand over to Nicole.
Hello from my side. I'm Nicole Kruger, the second voice in this talk. And yes, when we decided to publish the guided walk as an OER, after it had been published, we came across several barriers. And this is especially because we wanted to offer it as downloadable material. And this is an essential aspect of the definition of OER by the UNESCO, that it should be that OER should allow download and reuse and the option to make changes by third parties. So we had realized the guided walk with Typo 3 and the Bootstrap framework. They are open source, but through this we could not allow download. There was no download option for other users, and also content-wise, we used some screenshots, covers of publications, or also images of persons. And they had given us the allowance to use these materials, but we could not share them under CC license. So these were the barriers. And we had some lessons learned there, that it is essential to consider OER from the very beginning, to just change your practice and not just put openness on top when you already have designed your learning materials, but yes, to consider it from the very beginning of creating your learning materials. So yeah, our next project was to create an interactive tutorial for early career researchers. This is PhD students and researchers before the first publication, for example. And this time, yes, we had our lessons learned and we looked out for a technical platform that should be open source and have interactive content, allow the creation of interactive content, be mobile friendly, and as I mentioned before, it should allow easy download for reuse and that other parties, third parties, colleagues and other institutions could make changes and then republish the materials. So I personally was quite surprised when we found such a platform. And this is H5P. It is open source and mobile friendly. And you can create several kinds of interactive content elements like quizzes, drag and drop, dialogue cards, interactive videos, and interactive slides within such a plugin. It's a free plugin which you can download for WordPress, Drupal, Moodle. There is a new plugin for Blackboard, as I learned now. There is also a Typo 3 extension. So below each learning material which is created in H5P, other users can click the reuse link under the learning material and download this material into their own H5P plugin, and then make changes and republish it. Also, if you don't want to make changes, you can click the embed link and just copy a small code and enter it into your website or learning management environment like a YouTube video. So yeah, we used H5P. Also concerning licenses, this time we considered these early on from the very beginning. And we had to discuss really lots of times with our legal department. And we asked them about fonts, images of persons, screenshots, logos, and so on. And yeah, it proved to be quite complicated when we looked into the details of working with CC licenses. And yeah, our legal department advised us that we could use the CC0 materials under our CC BY license, which yeah, we wondered if this would be possible if we don't mark the CC0 materials as such. But yeah, you can publish CC0 under CC BY. We did not use any images of persons, no screenshots, only images under CC license. For logos, we used a disclaimer. And one more thing concerning licenses here. First, we wanted to publish the whole academic career kit, our online tutorial for early career researchers under CC BY NC license, which would not allow commercial use of these materials. But then we got to know that we would not be able to share these materials in portals like YouTube or other commercial portals which show advertisements or have commercial interests. So yeah, as a short summary of the whole questions of CC licenses, we really became best friends with our legal department, which is good and nice. But altogether, this is quite a barrier to OER because I think not every institution has a legal department to become friends with. So, okay, back to Tamara.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. I'll just give you a short glimpse of what it actually looks like. And I also posted the URL to the live version of this in the chat, so you can find it there. This is the actual academic career kit. We have 3 different modules. The first one is on publish your paper with 4 different subsections, like find the right journal to publish, find how to publish open access, or will you publish open access. Also one part, caution predatory journals, and your copyright as an author. And here just some examples. Whenever you see these little circles in the H5P version, then there's an interactive part. So this was the part on fake journals or predatory journals. So you can drag and drop. This seems suspicious on areas of the text here, and when you're done, you can see the answer sheet and see if you were right and found all the suspicious areas. Your copyright as an author, of course, is a very difficult part, because we have to put in brackets in Germany, and also that this is no real legal advice, but it may give people an idea of what to look out for. And you have these yes and no options, and according to these, you will go to other parts in this interactive tutorial to find your answers, hopefully. There's also a shoulder to cry on, so a bit of personal support and a bit of comic relief every now and then, and so you can find support and more information on that. You're not alone with what you're going through right now. The second module is on metrics and networking, and has also 4 subsections, like enhance your visibility and network, measure your impact, collaborate and co-write, and stay up to date. And here's just one example also of an interactive drag and drop quiz. We have a part on why would it be nice to have a researcher ID, for example, in ORCID. And so you can play this quiz and decide which of these names belongs to which person on the table. And then you can see the results. And the point there is we just don't know. So you can see that the names don't actually give you a clue who's who, the string of the names, but an ID would be a good point there. So and then of course a little reward in form of a picture after you're done with that. And the third module is about finding and sharing research data, which again has 4 subsections, like a data management plan, finding existing data, collect and store data, and publish and share data. And there's, for example, like also further reading material and so on. And so we have these 3 different modules, and there's always a version now, because this is a second or an updated version of the first one we came out with, so that if people use it and reuse it, that they know which version they are actually using. And so we had all this out there in the open, and we pushed the info through our channels, and but then the question occurred, well, how can users and teachers actually find our materials? And this is where I hand over to Nicole again.
Yes, you see that Tamara is always the smart head,
No.
asking very smart questions. We wanted to share our materials, and we looked out for portals where we could upload those. It was not possible in YouTube, sure, because it is not a video, but also not in CC Search. Wikimedia Commons did not support the format, the H5P format, as you see in the little picture there. And yeah, Pixabay is only for images. SlideShare was no option. So yes, only OER Commons was a portal where we could register our academic career kit, which is great because I think it's internationally very well known as a portal for OER. But we also know that students, PhDs, or teachers, they usually don't just go to OER Commons. They use Google for searching for materials, which they can use in their class, for example, or just for self-learning. And when we searched for our academic career kit in Google, in the advanced search, there you can set the limits to licensed materials with CC licenses. We could not find, actually, we couldn't find our own academic career kit. It was not indexed as OER. This was a problem. And through this, we also found out that the contents, the text of the H5P modules, yes, the contents of this H5P files were not indexed. So by the keywords within the slides, the interactive slides, you could not find our materials. So we must really describe them very well on the EconBiz website to make them findable. Yeah, when we were looking out for other portals where we could register them, we found that there is really a limited number of search portals that register OER across universities, across institutions, regions, or countries. So there's a lot of things wanted at the moment. But as a positive remark, there's something forthcoming. For example, an H5P, they are developing a search hub right now. So this year it should be online already. So you can share your H5P materials through this H5P hub and other users can find it there. And also in Germany, there is a project by several partners which design a concept for federated search for OER across universities. So yeah, that you have one single entry point for finding OER. And this is really, yes, a nice benefit. I think it's really good that there's a lot going on now. I think many people that created OER are missing such portals, and that's why there's a great development going on right now. But as a conclusion, we found that also considering the format is really essential when you want to provide OER and for sharing them. Not only the licenses, which we mentioned in the beginning, or the technical platform. Also, from the very beginning, you should consider which format you want to use to share your OER. And we now use a mix of formats, for example, PDF for such a booklet for students for writing their best paper. We have videos on YouTube, which we share there, which are OER, and the academic career kit, because it wasn't indexed in Google, as I mentioned, we also offer it now as a PowerPoint slide and as PDF, which, yeah, might be better findable, but also it's commonly used format in classes. So we will see if this is something which people would like to use. Yeah, I think this is our talk. Thanks very much for your attention. And yes, we are through.
Okay, thank you, Nicole and Tamara, for sharing with us your lessons learned on sharing and reusing online materials. Sounds much more difficult than you think. Please hang on.
Yeah.
Sarah and Maurits, please activate your camera and mic. And in the meantime, Martina, will you start the little poll? Because to get a bit of discussion, we would like to ask the audience to answer 2 questions, just to get a bit of an idea together on where we all stand, and to get you a bit from your chairs virtually. The first question is on the screen now. To what extent, oh, I can't see it fully because up. To what extent the themes openness and transparency play a role in your library? There are a lot of answers coming in. Everybody's still awake. That's for sure. I think I saw in the beginning when we started, I think we have 175 attendees. Okay, seems we have some answers. An important role for 69%. Rather important, 24%. Not very important, 7%. Can we reflect a bit on this, speakers? Does this surprise you?
First ask the second question, maybe.
Yeah, I think it's great numbers because rather important. I mean, nearly all of the libraries deal with openness and transparency, or all the institutions of the attendees. So I think these are quite great numbers, even if they are not all clicking the important role, but rather important is still
is also important.
It's impressive.
Okay. Martina, will you show the second question? Does your library have at this moment concrete projects, products or services that support openness and transparency? See what happens. You're all staring at the screen. This also seems to be the case, which is not really a surprise. Any reactions from speakers?
Yeah, I think it's clear that most libraries now work on these themes and that also have concrete projects or services, and that there's only a small minority that is still living in the in the past, so to say. So I think it's indeed very encouraging.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Maybe for those libraries who think or who are at a starting point, maybe conferences like this and presentations like this might get you on the right track. And a lot of libraries already have a lot of experience, and maybe the advantage of starting at a later stage is that you can use the lessons learned. For example, if you look at the lessons learned from the last presentation, if you are thinking of opening up your learning materials, well, start thinking at it really at the start. So people might get their advantage from this kind of presentations. I looked a bit at the questions which came up during the sessions. Maybe we can have a look at it. I also saw that some of the more very concrete questions were already answered. But there is a question for Sarah from Alexandra Everley. How do you balance, explain and address your concerns for acknowledging and reducing bias with the open release of large data sets with embedded historical biases onto the internet?
Thanks. Yeah, I'm just reading that again. Good question. I think, to me, the open release of data sets can only be a positive thing. So it encourages and enables research where you can start to explore these embedded historical biases. So we've got some great examples of this already that have happened within weeks of releasing our first data sets. We've had some great work that we've actually got on our Data Foundry website highlighted from Professor Melissa Terrace, for example, exploring Encyclopaedia Britannica. We've had student groups at the University of Edinburgh looking at problematic language and attitudes in official government publications about the spread of disease in India in the 19th century, and that's also on our Data Foundry website. We've had students who are learning data visualization processes who have explored the problematic nature of different aspects of many of our data collections. So I think openness is almost the solution to this, that we need to put these out there so that people can start to research them and we can start to explore them. And perhaps libraries can also start to partner with researchers to explore our own collections. I also think framing the collections as well as you can is important. We have curator-led introductions to our data sets. Of course, that's one particular person's point of view or a library's point of view, and that's problematic in itself. But ultimately, I guess we inhabit a problematic space. We can never eradicate biases. Libraries aren't neutral. So there's never going to be a full solution to this. I think that openness is certainly the way forwards.
Okay, thank you. I had a question myself, Sarah. Do you have any idea, or can you spend some words on who is using or reusing the data sets you are offering?
Yeah, sure. So initially, our main focus has been on the research community. So that's where I go out and about and promote our data sets to. That's a decision based on the fact that there's only me doing this at the National Library of Scotland, so we don't have extensive resource. And researchers are the area who have the existing skills and knowledge to carry out things like text and data mining, for example. There's also more funding in that space. So initially, it's been researchers. We've also had some really great work from students, as I mentioned, because talk courses are great for quick win examples for the library to go back to the library and say, look at the value of this, because students have short-term projects, so there's immediate examples there. But we also have, we've started spreading out to different communities, and we need to start to do this in a more systematic way over the next few years, and that's part of the plan. But we do have, for example, an artist in residence who's doing amazing work with machine learning and our collections, and he's producing new artworks based on our collections, and he'll be finished up soon. We've had many different communities interested in getting in touch, from like family history groups, for example, have been in touch about our data sets, wanting to download them, maybe not to use them for computational purposes, but so that they can kind of bulk access some of these records. But the next step is very much to go out to different communities and to see who else will be interested in them.
Okay, thank you very much. I scroll through the questions. There was a remark from Rado van Vrana for Maurits. Not all these repositories are working. I did a research in 2019 and a number of them were not accessible. Do you have any remarks on that?
Yeah, so I saw the remark as well. Well, at least there are 5,000. I didn't check them. Yeah, yes, probably yes. But I think the majority is working. And as we've seen in this Open Science Monitor data, and also what Heather Piwowar said in the presentation in the earlier session, green open access is a really important contribution. But yes, of course, there are among the 5,000 institutes repositories that are not working for a while, or maybe for a long while. But I think, again, I would like to emphasize the importance of we had this discussion. Maybe you guys are all very young and you don't know that, but there was lots of discussion a few years ago between gold and green proponents. And I think it's a waste of energy.
This discussion is a waste of energy.
Yeah.
Between
Because
green
it
and
was
gold.
like
Yes.
fighting. It was this
Yes.
is the right direction, and yeah, all directions go in the right direction. Open access.
Okay. Okay. Thank you for your answer. The question of Camilla Lindeleu is also for you, Maurits. The survey app sources for APCs, where did the authors come from?
Yes, they come really from all over the world. I just took out the paper. So here you can see primitively the graph. But let me say from China, 78 rest of respondents. Rest of Asia, 160. North America, 160. So it was really a worldwide author survey, and from all continents that were participating. And there were also differences between the continents. And again, that is related to the differences in the for the various continents with regard to research funders, and also with regard to yeah, open access policies, but also repositories, by the way, because China is of course an incredibly big country, and lots of researchers there, lots of universities. I forgot exactly the number, but it's always amazing numbers over there. And they have not so many repositories. So institutional repositories over there. The research funders have repositories, and the universities, some have, but most of them have no repository. So the open access situation in each continent is really different. And that's why I said also in my presentation, I think this LIBER strategic vision of predominant open access in 2022, now maybe 1 or 2 years later. But for Europe, yes, if we go on this way, we can achieve that. But it's much more difficult to envisage that for instance, in China or in the rest of Asia. Again, United States of America is a really different situation with regard to the research funders. So that is, I think also we should reflect on that. How can we as European libraries, if I can say so, manage read and publish agreements and open access transition if in a few years' time European produced articles are on open access and all the continents are lagging. So I'm not yet, I think about it, but I have no answer. Maybe you have, or the audience have.
Should LIBER aim at working more closely together with, for example, the ALA or IFLA, or to try to spread the word amongst our library colleagues worldwide? I think we already do a lot of work in that direction, but maybe we should add some extra effort to this.
Well, I think, first of all, I think that LIBER does that already with the counterparts in Australia and Canada and the US. China, I'm not so sure. But again, it's not so much the library. Yeah, the library cannot do it alone.
No,
I think
that's true.
it has to be a collaboration of the stakeholders. The only thing that the library can do alone is this institutional repository, I think. So that's again a plea for using all the tracks and not only one track.
Okay. I had another question for you, Maurits. You talked about transforming our journal acquisition budgets to open access publishing budgets in universities or libraries. What time schedule do you have in mind? Do you think it will take us a few years? Do you think it will be earlier? Do you think it will take 10 years?
Well, I hope that it will take a few years only. It will take a few years to establish this read and publish deals and have the workflows in place, get everyone used to it. Also for this long tail publishers, a mechanism. Again, there are already some in development. But I think then it goes rather quickly. Because if you have as a library 20 odd read and publish or publish agreements in place, 70% is open access. So you don't need to have a journal collection for that part. If the rest of Europe is doing it as well, of course. And that is, I think, happening. So that is why I'm going back to earlier. In a few years' time, we will have, hopefully, Europe produced articles on open access. You would like to have the rest of the world on open access so that you can get rid of those complicated read and publish deals. But yeah, that is probably will not be the case. So maybe the lifetime of read and publish agreements will be a little bit longer.
Okay, thank you. Some questions for Tamara and Nicole. Camille Yesiltas asks, legal advice usually takes time. How do you plan the timeline for legal things?
You want to take this, Nicole, or shall I?
Sorry, I just unmuted my mic and then it told me that I'm unmuted and I didn't copy the last phrase. So how can I take time for what?
The question is, legal advice takes time, and how do you plan that in your timeline?
Yeah, that's a bit problematic because you work at the issues and then you have to have loops with the legal department. Usually we just call them when we want to embed something or integrate something into the materials, and then afterwards we plan some time for them to have a look at the whole materials so that they can give us a feedback if we must take something out, if we must change something, if we must put a disclaimer and so on. So yeah, it's often we get in touch at the point of need, where the question arises, but afterwards they have a check on the whole material.
Okay, thank you, Nicole. There was another question from Inge, and we had some chat discussion. The question is, for your open educational resources, is the open science framework for dissemination?
Yeah, we just had a look at it. We did not actually consider this up to now, and we'd have to check it. It's probably a good thing. We had a couple of suggestions beforehand, and so Nicole submitted to many platforms. But yes, we will have to have a look, but not so far.
Do you have because I don't. Do you have an idea what Inge exactly means with the open science framework?
I just had a look at the website, but I don't have a real good impression yet. So
okay. Inge answers it's just a suggestion.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah,
we will have a look.
Definitely.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Google will help us.
Yes. Or DuckDuckGo.
I also had a question for you. I was wondering, can you spend a few words on what you know about use and reuse of your material? Because you spend a lot of time and energy in open access publishing of the material. Do you have some experience with, or did people mention to you that they use the material, that they reuse the material for their own goods? Did they change it?
I had an evaluation running. I checked on the web how often the academic career kit is mentioned in external sites and so on. And I saw that some people are linking it. The download option was used at least once, so other people that had downloaded it in the H5P plugin. I don't know if one can really keep track of this, because they can rename it, they can upload it under different names. And also, as I mentioned, the content of the H5P file is not searchable on the web. So it's really hard to keep track of this. But yeah, I saw that others used it and they actually used the older version. And then I came to the idea that this is an important issue for OER as well, the versioning, and that you somehow maybe keep in touch with those that reuse your materials, so you can inform them when you have major updates or something. But with OER, you in a way never know who reuses it, because they don't have to ask you, and they can just click the download option and do with it whatever they like. So that's a bit tricky to keep track of this, but yeah, we know of some people that use the materials at least.
Okay.
Yeah,
And did you? Oh, sorry.
Sorry.
Yeah.
We contacted some people directly who are doing like special PhD classes or something, because we thought that I mean, putting it up on different platforms is nice and good and makes it more findable, but probably most people will not have a look in general. Is there an OER out on this topic? But getting in touch with the trainers who are doing PhD classes and maybe just need one section on open access and would reuse this part. And we had pretty good feedback from the people we contacted directly. They said, "Oh, this is great," but I actually don't know if they actually used it, if they used parts of it, or what they did with it.
Okay, thank you very much. Is there anything else we like to discuss now we are still together?
I was very much interested in the presentation of Sarah, and I was wondering again, as the same question if you asked to Tamara, and you I beg your pardon, you said quite a lot of the problematic nature of possible problematic nature of collections. What are your users saying about it? Are they agreeing they see problems, or are they happy that you are so transparent? That I was interested in.
Is that for me, the question?
Yes, sure.
Yeah. So I think, to be honest, I don't know that we do get inquiries about it. Part of that is, well, I'll split it into two, I guess. Part of this is that we're a national library, so our audience is the nation, it's everybody. And this is almost where it becomes more like a bigger responsibility, because a lot of our users won't be thinking about this, and that's not a fault on their part. But that's not why they come to our collection. So they're not thinking about them in that more critical way. And that's where we do have real responsibilities, I think, in how we frame our collections, how we frame our digitized material, and show that what's on our digital galleries or our data collections websites aren't all of our collections, for example. So some people won't know that. Researchers are asking these questions. They're exploring these kind of things in detail. They want to see our metadata. They want to see our collections at scale, for example. But I think there's an interesting dilemma, I guess, between those two groups. When you are catering to a public audience too, you really need to think really carefully about how you're presenting your collections. And we've got a lot more work to do in this area. I'm sure lots of libraries do. It's something that we're going to have to all put a lot of work into over the coming years, I think.
Yeah, we in Holland, we have a project for digital heritage materials called the critical visitor, and that's exactly as trying to address this question of a bias in collection, and so that's why I was very I think it's fair. I would like to compliment you with your presentation, and especially with regard to this topic.
Thank you. I'd love to learn more about that project too, so it would be good to keep in touch about it.
I can send you a link to it. Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I also saw that Inge sent send us a link to the framework, the Open Science framework.
That's great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay then. Well, this was it. Thank you everyone for participating, participants, audience, and thank you speakers that you all were here this afternoon. This session was also the last LIBER 2020 online conference session. We really hope everybody had a good conference, despite of, or maybe even just because of the fact that we had to meet virtually. Thank you all again, and goodbye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Was
Thank you
great.
very much. Thank you. Bye.